All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We have a nice, good topic today, tailoring CTF prompts for your industry. So we're thinking about how you can build your workflow to, build prompts that fit gaps in your workflow and also are more tailored to your stakeholders. I'm joined today by Saif Patel and Alessandro Magi. We also call him Ali. Um, but they're both TI advisors at Feedly, and we have a really good topic. We also have a couple of companion pieces of material that we think are relevant and good. So we have a nice really a guide. Gabby is going to put a, a link to that guide um, in the chat, and so you'll be able to see exactly what these prompts are from there. It's freely available, no extra sign in or anything. Um, but before we get started, I'm just going to run through a couple of additional slides. Everybody can see my screen, correct? Seth, yep. Okay, Alessandro,
Yep.
thank you. As you know, we'd like to do a little quick promo about what Feedly is in case you're not familiar with Feedly, so I'll just get started. So Feedly allows you to turn noise or raw data into tailored intel that your stakeholders could act on. And it starts with 10,000 plus trusted sources. These are sources that are CTI focused that we have vetted and allows you to pull that information into what we call our threat graph. So we pull that information in, we process it. We have these AI models that identify things like CVEs and TTPs, and not just by like a TTP number, but also by the description of the TTP. So it's machine learning models that understand these things, and then they associate them with each other. So they build out a threat graph that has the relationships that we've identified. And then with task-specific AI tools, things like Intel agents or AI feeds, we pull that into information. We allow you to filter that down to what matters to you. Insights cards are a way to summarize information about a particular malware or threat actor, IOC, or cyber attack. So it's good information. It's all contained in one place. Ask AI allows you to ask specific questions at different places throughout the product. So whether you're in an AI feed and you look at a couple of articles and you want to understand those better, you can ask questions about that through Ask AI, but it's contained to those articles that you're asking questions about. So it's very limited and contained and focused so that you don't get hallucinations. It also comes with citations, which are really cool. Gives you auditability. We have something called a report builder, which allows you to build and create customized reports for your stakeholders. Automated newsletters is another way of sending that stuff out. So you can schedule these to go out to different groups within your teams. And of course, we have the Sticks API. So everything that we do when we pull this stuff in, we are able to render it as sticks, and we can share that with other tools and technologies. So the whole idea is to take that raw information and to create tailored intelligence that you can then share with either your stakeholders or with your TIP, your SIM, your AI agents, stuff that has the context that relates to your organization, the tool sets that you're using in your organization, the kind of risk that you are concerned about, allows it to filter all that down. So that's what Feedly does. Hopefully, if you're interested, you've already checked it out. But if not, you can always go out to feedly.com/threat dash intelligence, and you can ask for a trial. All right. Without further ado, let's talk to talk about the agenda. We also have our two guys here, Alessandro and Seth. Both of these guys are TI advisors, so they're out meeting with clients, and they both have some background in the financial services industry. Today's topic, we're going to focus on financial services, not because it's the most important or the only thing that matters here, but we're going to try to ground everything in one industry so you can kind of follow the examples from that perspective. But we'll also get some tips on how you can modify the prompts to fit your industry in different ways. So hopefully that fits people who aren't in the banking, financial services, insurance industries. So Alessandro will talk about three prompts that he's dialed up: the cyber attack, insider threat, and threat actor profiling. And Seth has three around supply chain malicious packages, fraud intelligence, and AI related intelligence. Um, oh, you ever drag down into the wrong part of your screen and everything goes blank and you have to relog in? I just did that. So, before we go too far, there's one we wanted to say, be careful with any prompt that you're running in any LLM. Think about the TLP protocols. You think about your own data, your own company's data policies. Are you able to share that stuff with an LLM? Is it going to, you know, is it essentially sharing private information you don't want to share? Make sure you're validating humans, use humans are validating stuff. Don't include customer data, account stuff. That stuff is always really risky. There are some of the LLMs, if you have the right level of, if you have an enterprise account with Claude, it does protect that stuff, but, not, you can't share it with, a free version of an LLM and expect it not to be used, for training and other things like that. These prompts are designed for, your own notes and your own assessments. Take them, read them, understand them, and, try them out. We think you'll get a lot of value out of them, whether you're using it in Feedly or using it in some other LLM. Sanitized IOCs, you can also use it for, published threat intelligence from, places like the FSISAC or commercial feeds or OSIP. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, don't just blindly go use these things. Hopefully you'll have, remember your own company's data policies and privacy. But of course, that's the business you're in, so you probably are well aware of all that. Before I jump into the the presentation, I'm just going to go back to this slide where you can see these two guys here, Alessandro and Seth. And first of all, you guys want to give a quick introduction, maybe touch on any financial services background or clients, not a specific client, but just mention client experience. So Alessandro, go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Shawn. I'm Alessandro. I've been at Feedly 2 years. Prior to that, spent 5 years in the Canadian financial sector and their threat intelligence environment there. Also spent a couple of years in government intel. But yeah, as Shawn said, worked quite extensively with a lot of financial services customers in various places around the globe. So different kind of experiences there geographically. Then also kind of not your traditional banks all the time. Could be even central banks, some of the smaller financial institutions, credit unions, things of that nature. So, yeah, hoping to apply some of that experience with some of the prompting here today.
Seth?
Thanks, Shawn. Similar to Alessandro, fellow Canadian as well. Last 5 years spent in the telecom and financial sector. Been at Feely for a year now, and similar to what Alessandro said, just using our past experience and our interactions with our customers to kind of develop these prompts and see what's important, and give you a resource that you can take back to your team that's actionable.
Awesome. Before we jump into the seriousness, we're going to start with two, we call them finish the sentence questions. The first question for both you guys, and this they don't know what this question is when you were doing CTI, what the workflow that gave me the most angst was, Alessandro.
Tracking geopolitical incidents over the weekend. They don't stop Monday to Friday. So,
All right, Seth.
IOCs, a lot of false positives out there.
Okay.
Double
good
check them,
one.
yeah.
And they have a little insight to this next question. We always do the second one, it's a little more fun, but yesterday we were talking about this. But what is one thing that you would wait in line at least 2 hours for, Alessandro?
Yeah, sad to say, but free merch, especially sports merch. All those Toronto Blue Jays lines. Looking at some of the giveaways upcoming in the next month and seeing which one I want to wait for. So.
Seth?
Yeah, for me, it'd be more so food related, maybe tacos or like a highly rated taqueria or ceviche area. So yeah,
So Seth recently waited in line for at least an hour and a half for a very a newly highly rated taco stand in Mexico City, right?
yeah. First Michelin star taqueria.
Taqueria, nice.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything I would wait 2 hours in line for before. Honestly, back in the day, concert tickets, but that's not a thing anymore. All right. With that said, two things that people are always going to ask about: is this being recorded? Yes, it is. You will get a link to all the slides. You'll get a link to the Q&A. You'll get a link to this recording. You'll get a link to the resources that we've shared, including the prompting guide and maybe a couple of other things. Um, and then that'll be tomorrow. Sorry. And oh yes, sorry. If you have a question, ask it in the Q&A. The chat is not open. It just keeps the noise down. But please ask your questions. We love to have that interaction. And with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Alessandro. Alessandro's going to keep going. Oh, never mind. I'll follow up. Alessandro, you can start us off. Let you have the
Cool.
control and take over the slides.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sean. Just sharing here. Hopefully you can see the deck come through.
Comes through fine. You're good.
Lovely. Awesome. There we go. Just moving things around here a little bit. All right, cool. So when Saf and I kind of put our heads together on this topic here, we wanted to like build out some workflows that were going to be, resonating with not only our customer base, but kind of everyone that's operating in the financial services space here. We tried to follow like a replicable process using some of those topics that are, we're hearing the most from customers that we would have gone through similarly as, former threat intel analysts, managers, so on and so forth there. So we're focusing on like friction points, some challenges that we would have had in our day to day, looking at like a full workflow of like what we would have to do from like a jobs to be done standpoint. And then also looking at what the stakeholder needs are, what the workflow needs are, because at the end of the day, your intel is only as good as like the stakeholders that you have and their requirements and whether or not you're satisfying those requirements in the outputs you're creating. So we tried to reconstruct stuff, work backwards from like what an ideal output would look like. And a lot of these prompts are already included in some of the resources that were shared, I believe, prior to this call on our TI Essentials blog. But we're also sharing them again in chat. I think Gabby's probably already popped those in. They'll also come following this call as well. So you'll have access to all the prompts that we're using today. And things that we were considering is like what were the most time intensive parts of our routine as analysts. And with that, I'll just pop to the next slide here, just my first topic of order, cyber attacks, and kind of tracking and assessing relevant cyber attacks in industry. So again, thinking about the jobs to be done here as like a CTI analyst, you're constantly like scouring the news, scouring different sources, probably living in a lot of tabs if you weren't using Feedly or other kind of aggregator sources there. And there's a lot of blind spots, a lot of questions that you get asked from leadership. Because a lot of the times you're seeing these different headlines hit the news and saying like, okay, cool, that's not a bank, so we're not impacted. We should be fine. There's a lot of follow-on impact and a lot of assessment that's required to fully rule that out to get us to be like more proactive as well. So I think this is a pretty good example to kind of walk through, what would be useful when assessing this kind of information. Because yeah, if it hits your CISO's desk, you're getting that question down at like 9 a.m. and you need answers fast. So hopefully this prompt will kind of help with that. And then yeah, assessing like organizational relevance is hard. I know in the financial sector, there's probably 3,000 plus vendors and software providers, and different levels of exposure that comes with that. So hopefully this can kind of help frame that in the output as well. So yeah, those are the challenges when it comes to the output. Hopefully, things that are actionable, things like indicators, detections that can be kind of employed in your environment. That's the goal, and then everything kind of rooted in your stakeholder requirements there, with some kind of contextual impact to your organization. Cool. So getting to the actual prompt itself, and again, we'll share the full details. This is more of like a summary of the structure of what will be included. All of our prompts, especially, SAFs as well, will follow the same kind of format. So you have some variables. You can input different jobs, different sectors, countries, and add that context into the prompt when you're running it. And again, we're rooting this in the financial services sector. So when we're looking at like the cyber impact of different attacks, we're going to look at assessing the overall impact, looking at the attack chain, any indicators of compromise that are associated to that attack, so we can push that into like a seam or a tip, for example, any different tactics that we're observing, as well as that cascading impact. We want to know, if a bank is not directly impacted, could they be down the line through the supply chain? Are they using them as a vendor, for example? So we don't want to infer based on the information we have. We only want like factual stuff in these kind of outputs, just so we have that credibility up front too. Um, just looking at the specific structure of the output format, anytime I'm doing like an Intel output, it's always going to have a bluff statement, bottom line up front. That's CISO ready. They want like two sentences on the specific topic, the impact, and it just allows them to scan that Intel report without having to go into the level of detail that some of the other stakeholders might require. So that's something I would definitely include as well. As we already mentioned too, things like the attack chain, really framing what's taken place in that attack is helpful for other teams as well from an incident response standpoint. And of course, we have that sectoral impact, the IOCs, detection rules were available too. The final one that I think is like less common but super important is like the intelligence gaps. Like, what do we not know about this particular incident, this attack? Like, what are the unknowns that we haven't uncovered yet? Because a lot of the times information is sparse and it comes out at different points in time. A lot of the times when you're doing these intel reports, the actual output is not the be all and end all. There's going to be follow-on updates day in and day out following this. So there will be several versions, and I think qualifying those unknowns is really helpful and allows your intel team to frame what the next kind of outputs look like too. So yeah, a pretty decent prompt there first. And then when we look at actually running the specific outputs, I think it was important for Saif and I to be able to craft these prompts in a way that they can be used in any LLM, generic one. Take your pick, you can run it in there. You'll get an output. I just included a quick like excerpt from ChatGPT, and you can see the Feedly output on the right. I'll walk you guys through a little bit of that following this. Following like Shawn's like forewarning a little bit too, some of the generic LLMs, they can lack that CTI context and that data that Feedly and other vendors kind of provide. They've been indexing data on threat actors, attacks, vulnerabilities, indicators for decades now at this point in this industry. So that data is super valuable for contextualizing what you're seeing and giving the LLM access to that is pretty key too. The other kind of cautionary tales is around sourcing. Being able to define the sources that you use from a quality standpoint will help improve the Intel product. And then if you're ever able to craft like either feeds or different Intel agents in Feedly with that organizational context, that's another key thing that some of those generic LLMs are missing. Cool. So with that said, just a Feedly workflow at a high level, and I'll show this in the tool for this cyber attack component here. When we're looking at this workflow, I start with like our Intel agents. For me, that's the easiest way to contextualize what's going on from a cyber attack standpoint. This Intel agent will continually scour a variety of sources and cluster together the attacks that are observed. So you can see it's looking past 3 months, finance industry. Coupling that with the finance company specifically, you can see some of the big players there globally, as well as references of financial institution in the specific outputs as well. This agent is really handy again for clustering stuff. I've just filtered by trend and looking at the past 3 months, looks like there's been a lot of reporting on this particular Marquise data breach, just given the kind of scope of impact there. So what we'll do in this workflow is run that prompt on the specific insight card. What's great about this is it clusters all of the specific articles reference this attack in one place. So when you run this analyze prompt on top of it, you're able to get access to all the different data sets that we've compiled on this versus like one article. And I've gone ahead and done that. So I've popped in that cyber attack assessment prompt. You can see the output there with the bluff statement, the attack chain, fully organized. And this is what the output will generally look like. So pretty scannable bluff statement there. It gives you the impact up front, what happened, the scope of the attack chain with like the MITRE T codes mapped, any available like IPs, IOCs, et cetera there. And then what we care about most is probably the sectoral impact. And you can change this prompt around. If you wanted sectoral impact up front, it's just a matter of like rejigging the prompt. So you can see there's like a central impact and then some cascading effects there, and different like compensating controls. And then, yeah, my favorite would be like the intelligence gaps. So, is there attribution to threat actors, ransomware families, so on and so forth. But that would be like the first kind of setup for a prompt that I would run. Again, this workflow can be, replicated for, again, other industries or other kind of CTI topics, but in this case, we worked off of the cyber attacks. All right, cool. Another one that definitely caused me a lot of headache back in the industry days was tracking insider threat incidents. A lot of the time, there are these big headlines with like huge multi-million-dollar impact, but like no context on what the lessons learned were, what the actual takeaways from the attack were, what the behavioral indicators were. And I think that's where the kind of goal of this prompt got into, is just try to contextualize some of the attack details a little bit better. So your internal teams and stakeholders can take better action and really reinforce that security posture from these different attacks. These are interesting though. They're kind of industry agnostic. Like if an insider threat attack happens in the insurance industry, like your folks operating in like the insider threat space in the finance sector, they'll still care about it. They want to know what those kind of behavioral indicators were. What were they seeing on the insider side that they can possibly replicate and or mitigate against going forward? So it's a cautionary tale again of not being too narrow focused on like your industry specific and looking at like whether there's potential spillover from those specific threats. Again, attribution is complex, and that's kind of a dual focus there of some of the actual victims not wanting to disclose that their kind of security controls were breached. And also, again, assessing that relevance is hard too, because again, none of this really maps to like those traditional like T codes or indicators of compromise. CTI is kind of its own space as well. So again, when we look at the prompt, just on the next slide here, you'll see we've tried to like add in like those gaps about like mapping specific tactics observed with that behavioral context, looking at a specific timeline and seeing what the dwell time was for maybe the insider that was involved there, and seeing what the kind of unique position of the financial services space, like whether that was impacted directly or whether it could be in subsequent attacks as well. Again, similar format. This prompt will follow with that bluff statement. You'll see that throughout all the prompts I have. Here, critically, we have that incident timeline. We want to know about the assets compromised as well, any like control gaps that were observed, any regulatory implications too. If it was a significant enough attack and that was disclosed to like regulators, I think in the financial services space, you'll want to know about that and be able to kind of speak to your stakeholders about the impact there. Maybe uniquely for like insider threat, the actual stakeholders can be pretty like wide. So it can be, maybe a SOC, for example, for some of the more technical components, but legal, HR, insider threat teams directly, even corporate security might be interested in these types of incidents. So it's a very wide stakeholder base. So just something to keep in mind with that. In terms of the workflow, and I'll pop into the tool shortly here, you can operate off of like AI feeds tracking insider threat activity in finance, or you can operate off of the Intel agent as well. So there's a couple of different flows. You can do like an article-based flow where you run a prompt on top of a subset of articles, or you can do it similar to what I did for the kind of like the cyber attack and look at the specific insight card with that full clustered data there. So just to show that quickly here. Again, I'll look at what I've kind of compiled, either like a feed, as I mentioned, so looking at individual articles. Yeah, I have the actual insight card up, so that's what we always prep beforehand. But you can see this specific incident here, and this is the one I'm looking at for insider threat. So it's looking at like a Kraken incident. Looks like there was an insider threat-based extortion claim there, and the support team was kind of involved in kind of supporting that malicious insider claim. And you'll see a full timeline here in the insight card. So that prompt is going to work really well to pull that context out. So it'll do like a full chronological reconstruction of it, map to any potential insider-based like tactics observed, full like set of assets compromised, and a full like bluff as well. So again, here's the output we're working off of. You can see like pre-incident signal, The full timeline here is pretty wide too, with additional like disclosure coming in April of this year. So it was a pretty significant incident that took place. Again, TTP mapping where possible. And here's where we get into some of the stuff that the insider team would care about. Again, like assets compromised. You can see specific like customer support records. And this is where the financial services customers would care about like customer identity data, et cetera. And then your gaps as well with some regulatory impact. And of course, full sourcing down below too. Cool. Back to our deck for my final workflow here, looking at like threat actor profiling. This was another kind of job that I had to do again in a previous space in finance, looking at profiling threat actors in a more like narrow focus. So seeing if there's specific attacks that were kind of impacting the financial services space and tracking that and documenting some of the key kind of detections, indicators of compromise, as well as attack patterns. So our technical teams could be on top of that. Here's tricky to track because threat actors quickly rebrand, they shift techniques, their tooling, their infrastructure can change. I think providing teams with timely intel on that is pretty important. And again, when we're looking at like assessing this, we need to map it to like the organizational security posture, where the gaps maybe are in that. Are they using specific software tools and certain versions of those tools that are vulnerable to the techniques and the access methods that are observed by these threat actors? When we look at like structuring the output in kind of like an ideal state, we would have like, active and current tactics mapped to that specific actor, known indicators with like a nice narrow time frame, so those indicators are not deprecated, and impact statements that actually do map to like defensive gaps. That's maybe a nice to have because a lot of the times the security posture can be managed by like other teams as well. And again, we think about providing this intel to threat hunting teams, for example, will want to be mindful of like the different query languages that they want to receive this in and what's like the best format for them to receive that in. So again, just some contextual things before we get into the prompt. Cool. So this prompt works kind of twofold. The first and foremost is going to give like context about the specific actor. So whether they're new, whether they've rebranded, what kind of aliases they're operating on, all that context is important when providing that context to other teams. The other aspect of it, it embeds like a bit of a hunt package there to see if there's anything detectable in your environment, and then like a full exposure assessment for the financial services industry as well as your organization. So that's where you probably add in like an analyst note once you learn more about the potential impact there. Another thing too, it'll defang all the IOCs. It'll make them seem ready so you can push those across and really gives the analyst an opportunity to validate those before you go across and send that into tooling and start blocking a bunch of stuff in your environment, which, as we all know, can lead to some adverse results there. So just one thing to note there. Again, same thing. You'll have the kill chain in there as well, and any of the tooling that they're used. We just want to provide as much context as possible. For this, the workflow was a little bit different. Kind of what I did was roll in with the TTP agent and kind of map that to the financial sector to see what threat actors were most active and what techniques they were deploying most commonly against that sector, and then identifying those threat actors and running prompts on top of that. So I'll just pop back into Feely for the final time here. I did open up with Lazarus Group, but I'll just pop into the Intel agent first, just so you have a sense of what that looks like. Oops, I will refresh here. Cool. I will just grab Lazarus Group and I'll pop analyze and I'll just grab my prompt so we can run it live.
Nothing like a live demo, right?
Gotta love it. All good. We'll just pop the prompt in. It'll run on Lazarus. Again, these guys have been pretty active, and we should get a decent output here. You can see it's running on all the different articles that we've indexed in this insight card, and it should get you close to your output. There we go. That was pretty quick. Pretty happy with that. Cool. So the intended output again was to give you that like identity, the aliases. You can see it's actually captured quite a lot of aliases from different like vendors out there, which is pretty cool. We have the motivation set up. specific victimology here. They do target a lot of like cryptocurrency. So again, depending on like the scope of your industry and finance, you may want to just report this contextually. A lot of like social engineering targeting from like LinkedIn and onwards, compromised accounts as an initial access method, which you'll probably see, yeah, here too, phishing being pretty integral to their operations. You have information on their tooling, full set of like IOCs. This is where it starts to get fun with like the different hunt hypotheses of like delivering like PowerShell payloads, which ones are kind of more commonly observed. From here, we could also pivot off and create like a report as well, which is pretty cool. Not sure if we have enough time to run through that. Probably not, but you could also create like additional reporting and then pass this on to like your stakeholder teams after that. That's probably it from my side. I'll just pop back to the slides. Saf, I imagine you'll probably want to take over.
Yeah,
Hey,
I'll just.
before you
Mhm.
Yeah.
do, I'm
Oh, is
just
there a
going to
question?
ask you a question. It's not from the audience, so I was just curious. So when you
Yeah.
go to one of your prompts, can maybe back up a slide or two
Yeah, sure.
to there. So what is the financial services specific thing in here, or is most of what you're doing, um, you know, changing the content that you're submitting to the LLM to make it more finance specific?
Yeah, this can be used in like two ways. It can either be with actors you know are targeting the financial services space, but there's still like an exposure section down here. So financial services exposure assessment directly. So that will reference any potential like indicators about the financial sector or
Okay.
maybe any like
So
cascading impact there.
if you wanted to change that though, if you wanted to change it for manufacturing, for instance, like what were the areas of this prompt that you would change?
Probably the variables up top here, probably the context too, just to get rid of that financial services reference. And then that specific exposure assessment down there would probably be the three things to change to make this like usable across like a variety of industries.
And then you go run it against content in a Intel agent, a feed, or against a
Yeah,
insight card
exactly.
that is related to that industry.
Yeah, exactly. A specific attack, a specific, let's say, even like scattered spider, for example, if they've been operating in like the insurance space, you could run it on top of this group or a specific article, right? Like you could build a feed directly for like the insurance industry, and then you could start pulling in like specific articles you're seeing, maybe specific like cyber attacks, for instance. Um, really like the world's your oyster. Getting narrowed today, but
Yeah, I don't know
generally
what
it's
your
pretty.
errors are. Well, it still came up.
Yeah, I mean, we can also, I mean, if it's shiny hunters, that's like hit Canada life there. I mean, Canadians are getting hit. We could just pop in our go-to button, pull up like shiny hunters, for example. We'll leave that, and then that's as quick as the workflow can be, right? So,
All right, I'm just gonna just call this out because it's something that I think is really awesome. Is you just hit the go-to button. It's also the Command
yes.
K button. So if you want to find something, you can just type it in right there. Yeah, I know people have maybe had some problems finding things in Feedly in the past. This is so much better. It just greatly simplifies how you find things. All right, thank you so much.
Cool.
Let's pass it over to Seth. Seth, you're on the hook.
Perfect. I'm just gonna steal the screen and all right, perfect. So one of the things we talked about, me and Alessandro, prior to this session was what are the recent threats that are making the headlines? And first thing we came up with was software supply chain. It is always been, but especially now, is a regular leadership and security concern. Financial institutions, but it's really industry agnostic. I depend on open source packages. They have SaaS platforms, cloud services. You have your third-party vendors list, CI/CD pipelines, you name it. And so a single vendor issue or malicious package can create downstream risk, uh, but not every report means that the institution is directly exposed. And so as a CTI analyst, I need a way to separate confirmed impact from our dependency reviews and translate that into a practical follow-up. So we want to make it actionable. And some of the challenges we face are, you rely on large, complex software ecosystems. There are a lot of open source packages, different tools. A lot of reports describe broad technology risk without proving actual organizational impact. And so in that case, it's easy to overstate that exposure when a package or vendor is widely used. And then your ownership for an action item can be split across your CTI, SOC, engineering, vendor risk team, business teams. And so our output needs to be grounded in assessments based on source evidence and not assumptions. Um, and so that's what the prompt kind of does. If I were to quickly jump over into that prompt, it turns our generic software supply chain news into financial sector risk in this case, but again, it can be industry agnostic. Quickly walking through that prompt here, we highlight specific pipelines that could be impacted, and I'll walk you through that workflow real time. But you can see the output format contains an executive summary, again, that bluff statement, an incident summary, any vendors, CVEs, if it's part of the known exploited vulnerability catalog, um, supply chain exposure, direct FI and fintech impact. So any pathways to your payment system, IAM system, fraud detection systems that could be compromised. And then also calls out the affected technology, some more CTI related risks. So threat actor, concentration, if it can be cascaded or embedded into current risk. And then one of the things that Alessandro also highlighted was that intelligence gap. Where else can I get intelligence from? To quickly pop on over into our Feedly workflow, what I like to do is I create AI feeds. So these are essentially feeds that track intelligence coming from open source, but we use AI models to kind of refine on intelligence that matters to us. In this case, my intel requirement is software supply chain. So I'm looking at malicious packages targeting high open source software libraries, developer technology, as well as how threat actors are using it. So these three AI feeds, if you're a current Feedly enterprise customer, we'll share it with the link to you after the call so you can kind of replicate that in your own environment. But what I tend to do is once I have my feeds created, I select articles in the last 7 days and then I run that prompt on top of it. So just to quickly pop on over into Feedly to show you what that looks like. I have my AI feeds right here, tracking 3 different IRs. And then I select articles in the last month or so, depends on your cadence. Running that prompt on top of my selected articles allows me to provide context that is more recent and actually matters. And just to quickly walk you through this prompt, this report highlights any financial sector relevance. So again, it can be industry agnostic. You can change those variables around, but we give you an incident and threat summary to understand what happened. And then again, that supply chain exposure pathways that you can kind of do a deeper dive in, report back to teams to see if there's been direct impact. Also, some more FI related exposure impact, so payment processing systems, identity, authentication, fraud monitoring, etc. We highlight the affected technologies as well, and then give you some more context around threat actor campaigns and downstream risk. These recommended actions are, again, AI generated, so I would be careful, but again, it gives you a good baseline to start if you don't know where to start, or gives you a more so solid foundation to kind of iterate on and refine on. Again, this prompt has an ability for us to download it as a CSV if you kind of wanted to send it to different teams, keep track of if there's been impact. Again, goes back to metric gathering. What action did we take from this intelligence? Perfect. I'll quickly jump on over now into the second scope, which was fraud intelligence. Now, these prompts were directly pulled from the BSFI workflow library, which was shared by Gabby. I decided to highlight fraud intelligence because I feel it's an underrated intelligence requirement where prompts aren't as evident. And so I highlighted 2 prompts. The first one was a fraud impact assessment, more so focused on fraud. Again, it's interchangeable based on fraud type. So you don't necessarily have to look at payment redirection frauds or business email compromise. You can interchange it with things that you're seeing in your industry, whether that be like pig butchering, romance scams, any kind of fraud. that you're more accustomed to seeing can kind of be put in as a variable. In this case, we're looking at, again, fraud signal mapping. So seeing what kind of indicators can we check back in our environment to see if there are evidence of fraud based on open source reporting. There's also different vectors. So if there's a payment identity risk vector, we'll highlight that. If there's any mule network indicators to kind of, again, take back to your fraud team to see if there's some action we can take there. The second problem I wanted to highlight when it comes to fraud intelligence is a multi-stakeholder impact brief. Now, CTI doesn't necessarily also just provide threat intelligence. They can also provide intelligence to your risk team, vendor team, fraud team, and this is what that prompt does here. It eliminates that rebriefing loop, puts in 3 different stakeholders into one prompt, where you can kind of go in and with minor editing forward each actionable brief to the individual stakeholder there. And again, those prompts were part of that workflow example.
Hey, Steph, before you go on to the next prompt example, let's go back to slide 25 for a second.
Yep.
There was a question about whether you could, for your action targets, can we send to an external MCP? The example that we have here downloads a CSV.
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question. You want to be able to send it to an external MCP?
Yeah, I think so. To be able to send the output instead of a CSV format. I mean, I guess you could obviously take the CSV format and send that into MCP, but I think he's looking for a more automated approach.
Yeah, so we have an MCP server that you're able to kind of query on using the threat graph. And this prompt can be saved in something like a Notion database or as a template where your MCP can kind of connect to Notion. In some cases, use that as a template prompt and run against any net new intelligence using Feedly's MCP. So that's an automation pipeline that happy to discuss further after a call. Feel free to reach out or reach out to your TI advisor if you're a customer and kind of walk you through that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So just to clarify, you don't have to run this in Feedly. You could run this in any LLM, including you could run it through the Claude MCP server integration that Feedly has, and that would have it rate in a way that you could automate output and connect together with other tools that you want. So that's a good answer. All right, I'll let you get back to the next prompt. Oh, wait, we got one more.
Oh, yeah.
In general, for prompting, is the more context instructions the better, or is there some diminishing returns of quality of output if you provide too much?
That's a really good question. It's, I would say, a balance. Definitely depending on, again, the sources you provide, the data, initial data points. If you are providing articles or reports with less so much intelligence related to the actual prompt, that's when the more context you add, the less that diminishing return happens. So you also want to make sure that you're pulling in relevant intelligence and then running it on a prompt that understands the context to what you're running it on. And I think that's a perfect segue to our next section, which is AI related threat intelligence. Over here, we kind of want to inform and not overhype. That was the title. But AI is already on, management's radar. Reporting is uneven. Some activity reflects real adversary adoption and new exposure pathways. And other reporting is more so speculative, vendor-driven, or overstated. And so CTI, again, needs a way to separate that signal from noise and translate that AI development into practical organizational risks. And so some of the challenges, again, highlighting is it's increasing both across your enterprise environment and threat activities. It's evolving quickly. There's new pathways, new attack surface. And so our output needs to be, again, grounded in those assessments based on observed reporting. And then we kind of want to relate it back to our organizational impact. And so to kind of do a deep dive on the prompt here, again, this was something I've worked on with some of my customers as well as best practices we've come up with. Again, walks you through that bluff statement, but here we've broken it up into Six different intel requirements. So based on your intel requirement, we have an individual section. We also have a FI impact, sector impact, stakeholder actions, emerging themes, any metrics that you can kind of track, as well as some annexes to kind of see what kind of sources were used, were not used, any detection opportunities, as well as the intelligence gap. In Feedly, what that looks like is going back to providing that context, right? You don't want to be able to give a big prompt without much context. And so I have six different IRs here feeding into that prompt, each tracking individual things such as deepfakes, how is AI being used in phishing campaigns, how are agents being used to develop malware. To show you what that quickly looks like in Feedly, again, kind of a similar thing to supply software, all rolling up into one folder, selecting articles in the last 7 days since I want this to be a weekly report, and then running that prompt, including a table of contents, if it's something you kind of want to export into a PDF format, store it in a SharePoint, store it in Feedly now that you can upload PDFs into Feedly, and kind of run it against anything net new. So what this prompt looks at is, again, giving you that bluff statement, key takeaways, and then breaks it down by each individual IR that we are tracking in the feed here. So each IR translates back to a section in the prompt. Active threats against LLM models. So these, again, feeds will be shared with you after if you kind of wanted to replicate it in your environment. And lastly, just wanted to highlight any financial sector impacts. So again, what are the downstream impacts that you can kind of start as a baseline to see how it can impact your organization? And then again, take it back to your stakeholders. So what are some actionable items you can take back to your stakeholders? With that being said, I will pass it back to Shawn and also take any questions.
Okay, we do have another question here. Is there a way we can have, or is there an example of a prompt already filled out with the info for a threat actor? Usually I need an example to compare my version to find errors. Um, does that make sense?
Mhm. Alessandro, I
Yeah.
think referring to your threat actor prompt.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Give me 1 second. I'll pull up the account because there's a couple of ways you can approach this. I'm just gonna grab it quickly. Basically, if you have the ability to kind of look at like historical prompts that you've run, which I think we do have in the account, that would be like one avenue. But something else you could kind of do, we're looking at Lazarus Group, for example, right? Let's say you ran like the prompt, there's like a view recent responses button. If we had run it, we would have like a response there to compare to. Or like the insight cards, again, I'm probably not sharing here yet, right? There we go. Oh, it's coming through now. Okay, cool. There's a view recent responses button here. So I'd probably start with that to see if there's any like previous prompts that you have. Or in the insight card as well, it's dynamic too. So you could filter down by like a narrower time frame, run your prompt to look at the output, and also expand it out to like, let's say 90 days, which would probably have like your previous prompt content in there too. So I would try and play with the time horizon a little bit. Yeah, in Feedly is probably like the best way to do it. Maybe as like a final workaround, what you could also do, let's say you were looking at a workflow and saving a bunch of like articles to boards, that'll serve as like a historic example of like specific articles you've referenced when you were doing the prompt. So you could always run it on top of those articles again and like compare and contrast the outputs between two different boards or even just multiple articles too. So I'd probably pick and choose across those. Saf, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just the prompt library does use placeholders rather than a fully filled out example. So if you are a current customer, happy to work with your TI advisor would be happy to work with you to fill that out, to kind of translate those placeholders into more organizational context. Again, organizational context goes back to providing, you know, where your company's located, what the company does, and again, you can provide your threat actor watch list within AI feeds or within the prompt itself. You can provide an example of intelligence that's been shared in the past within the prompt itself to kind of follow the same structure. Um, but yeah, if you want something more fully fleshed out, your TI advisor will definitely be able to help you with that.
Okay, great. We have a couple more questions. How would you best deal with the AI beginning to drop, ignore certain pieces of a prompt mid-project? I noticed that it's common for it to start leaving out a certain piece of the prompt, and I'm uncertain if it's as simple as the prompt being too long. Either one, guys. One of you have something.
Yeah, thinking through a solution here. Yeah, if there are like character limits on like the prompt outputs, you probably want to be mindful of that. If you are a Feedly customer, you can potentially get access to like the report builder. That's where you'd be able to handle a lot longer outputs, for example. I'll just share and show like one of the ones I had, for instance.
Mhm.
Maybe the threat hunt one, because there's a lot of like hypotheses here. So in this case, we didn't really have like a drop based on the prompt. Like it's pretty extensive and lengthy here. So hopefully that might be a solution. But I would also just pay attention to if there are any specific like limiters on characters or anything of that nature.
Yeah,
Saf, any?
yeah. Just to add to that is just diagnosing why it's happening. So your context window has a limit. So if you're running into those issues, it's probably because you have a lot of articles kind of running as a baseline or as the data context for your prompt. And so it prioritizes content density over actual prompt compliance in some cases. And so your structured sections at the end of your prompt are the first to get dropped. So the way you can fix this is you move your most important sections to the top of the prompt, take that top-down approach. Then you can reduce article count. So maybe you want to just keep it to 10 to 15 articles, um, and make sure that those articles, again, are rich in content. Uh, and then if as a last measure, maybe add an explicit instruction at the top of the prompt. So you can include all sections listed if source material does not provide support a section, write no information available. So rather than just leave it blank, it'll just tell you like there was not enough information to fill out that section, and that's why it's being skipped.
Okay. We have a couple more questions. I'm gonna go I'll go just in the order they came in. So when selecting articles, Feedly often displays tertiary services rather than the primary service. So the way he's thinking about it is if like it might show a hack read summary versus a Mandiant blog, and then asks if Feedly AI is actually looking at all the articles tied to that particular topic or just those explicitly checkboxed. I think maybe also in this is if it is just looking at those that are explicitly checkboxed, how do you account for the sources that you're most concerned about, seeing the data from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing I would recommend is Feedly allows you to curate source folders. So we have some bundles already created for you to kind of start as a baseline, but we want our analysts to go in and create a folder where, sources are trusted. And this could be, again, your certs, security vendors, maybe a couple blogs, maybe some data leak sites if that's what you want, and then run your feeds on top of those curated sources. When it comes to tertiary sources, there is an AI model called Threat Intelligence Reports that will highlight any original sourcing articles. So these are like your Microsoft, Cisco blogs. Rather than a Believing Computer article talking about that threat intel report, you're going to get the actual threat intel report itself. So you can use that model to kind of refine down on that noise level. You can also throw in top stories to ensure that, again, it's trending articles coming in. But again, that would mean that it might be a little too late. So it depends on your IR. These are some kind of, yeah, threat intel reports as well as curated source folders would be my recommendation.
Okay,
Maybe
sounds
also
good.
running on top of insight cards too, because that'll
Yeah, yeah.
cluster both the threat intel reports as well as those top story based articles, and also have direct access to like the indicators of compromise, TTPs, all the associations there. That's primarily what I did in the prompts today.
Yeah, good guidance, guys. Next one, would you be able to purpose these prompts in the form of Claude skills without too much modification?
Cloud skills is if I'm running this prompt multiple times, I would use Cloud skills. So if I'm not changing much, Cloud skills is great. Alternative is you can save the prompt within Feedly as well. So anytime you want to keep running this as a weekly report, kind of able to go into that save prompt section and run it on the articles you select, or just on the threat graph in general.
Okay, great. Two more questions and then I'll close it. Uh, the guide is great. What workflow would you recommend someone start with for the most impact or time saved up front in your if your current process is fairly manual? So think about
I am
all the different workflows that we talked about today, or any that weren't on here that you might want to point them to.
Yeah, we might have different answers depending on our like lived experiences in CTI. For me, anything threat landscape oriented. So this example would be cyber attacks. Like those are the questions I got most as an analyst of like, are we impacted? What's the scope? Like getting ahead of those would have saved me the most time. Saf might have a different thought.
Yeah, for me, I was more so working with a threat hunting team, and so I would go back to actionable intelligence. So, what detection rules can I create from that ocean reporting? What threat hunt hypotheses can I send to my threat hunting team to kind of take actionable steps towards? Um, and then again, the easy lift is IOCs. Can I just extract IOCs as a starting measure, do some investigation, and kind of set it up for alerting for the next 30 days or even monitoring?
All right, one more question, but before I give this question, I'm going to say to everyone, we do have our next CTI session is already up. It's going to be on May 14th. It's about the next SANS 4478 course, which actually one of the authors is Josh from Feely, and we've got the other two authors are going to join. They're going to give you a little bit of a rundown about what the course is about, give you some insights from the course. So you actually get some gifts there, and then you can decide whether it's a course that you're interested in. Feely's not like earning money from being part of this course, but it is we did think it was worth promoting since we appreciate SANS and all they do. With that said, the last question, is there a way to get fully automated solution that can pull in articles and decide what is the most relevant ones to include in a report? It goes on to say maybe we have a few reports that contain different articles, such as the top five relevant articles, monthly, must read, feed, monthly, nice to read report.
Yeah, that's a,
Yes.
oh
Go
yeah.
ahead. No, Saf, all you.
Did you say yes first? Okay, I'll say yeah, that's exactly what your AI feeds plus an automated newsletter workflow is designed to do. So that's the combination of that is the way to get fully automated. So your AI feeds are again doing that relevance filtering. You build your feeds scoped on your PIRs, so whether that be threat actors, industry, CVEs, geography. And then we are continuously scoring articles and surfing only articles that match that relevancy. If you need help tuning those feeds, we're always there to support that. From there, automated newsletters then pull from those feeds and schedule and generate that report. So you can use these prompts as a baseline, refine it for more so newsletter, set that cadence, and then you're able to kind of push it out on a weekly, bi-weekly cadence or even daily.
Okay, awesome. Alessandro, do you want to add to that? Or you
I think I'm good. I'd love to drop an article in chat if that's cool. Basically, that's like a prompt library for like our threat intel powered newsletters. So if you think about applying the scope of the prompts from today, a lot of those can be repurposed in SAF's workflow, and we have some existing ones to get you started there today. That could be its own session, but yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it again. There's if you go out to feedly.com/CTI dash sessions, you'll see past recorded sessions as well as the next one that's coming up about the SANS 4478 course. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.